1, 2, 1, 2.
Could you help me set this up? Could you help me put this?
I would put, I would only just put it by my pocket piece. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Just we need to check the level here. So, if you come over here, just a second. Could you come over here? I'll show you something. So first of all, I had to put it the other way, like this. Yep. Now this is too loud. Of course, it goes red. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
That's fine.
1, 2, 3. 1. That's fine.
Yeah.
Should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
Okay.
Hello. You're planning to attend your tutorial in the end? 2 p.m. on Wednesdays?
Yes,
Yeah, you missed the first tree.
I know, because I changed degrees last year, so initially they just said choose a tutorial slot.
I know. We're missing your contribution. That's why I'm worried.
No, I'll be happy to attend that.
Of course. Looking forward to it.
I just only realized.
Of course. Hi. Hello. Hi. Welcome everyone to the most, I would say, the exciting topic of our course. It's got to do with reproductive behavior and population and labor. Now, as I always say, why study this topic? Why should we care about, population growth and its impact on economic growth? The answer is very simple. This graph shows you the population projection until the end of this century. At the moment, we're about 7 billion people on the planet. By 2030, we'll become 8 billion people. So extra billion will be added up in the next 14 years. Okay. And by 2050, we'll become 9 billion. Another billion comes out. So basically, until mid-century, 2 billion people are going to be added up to the total population of the planet. And the population will increase from 7 billion to 9 billion. And interestingly, as you can see, most of this increase is going to happen in Africa. So this is why it's really important. In your lifetime, the total population is going to increase from 7 billion people on the planet to 9 billion. Therefore, we need to know two things. Why is this happening? And secondly, what is the effect of this population growth on economic growth? Why is it happening? And what's the effect of this? So the lecture is divided into three parts. First, I'm going to talk about what has happened, population growth in Asia and Africa. Second part, I'm going to explain the first part. What factors drive population growth? And finally, we're going to talk about the effect of population growth on economic growth. So let's start. Population growth in Asia and Africa. Now, this, which is the page 13, is one of the most important tables. This is where we stand in 2010. The population for each region, 120 million in sub-Saharan Africa, about 1.5 billion in East Asia, and 1.7 billion people in South and Central Asia. And you have the growth of population, the rates. The fastest growth rate you have in sub-Saharan Africa, okay, and one of the East Asia, less than 1%, and Europe is not going, the population of Europe is almost not going to grow. Also, go back to our earlier lectures and bear in mind that, when we're talking about 30 years, 50 years, small differences in growth rate make a massive difference in the population. Massive difference. Just compare Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, and their influence on their population projection in the future. As I mentioned, we're about 7 billion people now. By 2030, it's going to increase to 8 billion people. Now, this is the population growth rate in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. As we mentioned in the table, the growth rate of Sub-Saharan Africa is higher than Asia, of course. The growth rate of population in Asia has been declining. It is still growing by 1%. Sub-Saharan Africa, the growth rate was initially around 2% in the 80s, the last decade. It peaked to 3%, now it's back to 2.5%. Interestingly, you had a surge of conflicts in the continent in that decade as well. Going briefly about population growth in the large Asian countries. China, you have the growth rates similar to where sub-Saharan African countries are experiencing in the 50s and 60s and 60s until 80s. Now it has dropped to 1.1% and it's going to drop further. You're going to actually have a shrinkage of population in China in the next, by mid-century. The growth rate declining in India. Japan is very low. It's a very aging population. And just compare it to the population growth in large sub-Saharan African countries. Even today, you have a very high growth rates, almost 3% in Ethiopia, averaging very high growth percent during this last 2 decades. Now, we just explained, just let me summarize what was happening, right? If you go to our initial, table that I provided, the population growth rate in the world is basically hovering around, 0 basically in very rich countries, 1% for most developing regions, but 2.5% for sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, their population growth rate is way higher than the other regions. We want to know why. The second part of our lecture. What factors drive population growth? The main factor that drives it is the process of demographic transition. Any country, the last page of your handout, any country that goes through the process of demographic transition experiences a population growth. Now, usually in social science, we always think of ourselves as inferior to natural sciences. We always think that we're not very good at predicting the future. But actually, when it comes to demographic transition, we're so good. Demographic transition is a universal process. It has happened in every country. Okay? You cannot find any exception to this process. The only exception is that some countries have finished it, some countries are at the middle of it. And interestingly, the second point is that this process happens the same in every single country. We have no exceptions. Once it starts, we see same things happening, exact same things happening in every country. And I'll explain to you why. There's no exception in history. So the only exception is that some countries have gone through this process earlier, some countries have gone through this process fast, some countries have finished this, some countries are in the middle of this process. Now, this is demographic transition. This is, the green line, is the death rate. How do we measure that? Number of deaths per thousands. Okay? Now this is the birth rate. Again, how do we measure it? Number of births per thousands of population. And this is the total size of the population. Yes? Okay. Let's start at underdeveloped society. How underdeveloped societies look like, Underdeveloped societies, one of their main features is that the death rates are high. Why? Lack of sanitation, lack of nutrition, lack of access to public infrastructure, lack of education. The death rates are high. Now, why the birth rates are high as well? Anyone? Yes?
Is it because so many people are dying, so more people are doing that? Because maybe to farm the land or something?
Good explanation. So, because so many people are dying, you have a high birth rate to replace them. Yeah. Yes? But why would you need to replace them in the first place? Yes?
Maybe because you need
Speak louder, please.
because you need children to help you with your work, farming.
Very good. Children, you need the children to help you at the farming. Remember, we're talking about an undeveloped society, very agriculturally based. Exactly. Thank you. So, what else? One reason you need to help them. Yes?
Lack of contraceptives.
Lack of contraceptives.
In some underdeveloped societies, they can use contraceptives.
Well, yes, but that's a secondary explanation. Let me explain to you. If you give a contraception to a poor village, will the birth rates automatically go down?
Maybe teach.
Yeah. Yes?
Attitude towards women, want daughters if they care for another son?
Okay, you try to get a son because the son works in the farm. Yes? Anyone else? Yes?
When a parent gets older, they need their kids to the hospital.
Exactly. Insurance, kind of a private insurance. So this was the main reason for societies that the birth rates are high. Why? Because the parents want to make sure two things. Enough of their children survive to help them in the farm, right? And secondly, they need insurance when they're old. In poor societies, it's not like here that you have a pension fund. You have to do it privately. Your kids provide that service to you. So initially, the main reason that birth rate is high is that the death rates are high for kids. The infant mortality is high. The main reason that the death rates are high in underdeveloped society is not the accidents, happens and people get killed. Or the main reason is the children. Children don't survive. Most of the children will die at the age younger than 5. Infant mortality is high, and therefore the birth rate is high. The families have a lot of kids, let's say around 6 or 7. Many of these children will die before the age of 5. So basically, the birth rates and the death rates are the same level, 25. What happens to the population? When the birth rates and the death rates are at the similar level? Nothing. It stays the same, exactly. Now, the first stage of demographic transition, societies start to change when this happens. The death rates for children start to go down. The death rates for children start to go down. This can have many factors. Let's say better access to healthcare. You've got better medicines. Or you have economic growth. Imagine industrial revolution in Britain. Income went up. Wages, remember, started to go up by the mid-19th century for the average worker. Therefore, the household could spend more on nutrition, on hygiene, on clothes. Therefore, they could reduce the chance of infants dying at a very young age. Okay? This is the first stage. Now, what happens to the population in here? First stage, anyone? Raise of hands. Sorry? Why?
Because less people die.
Yeah, less people die and
And the birth rate's still...
birth rate's still the same. Exactly. The birth rate is higher than the death rate. So whenever you see this gap, that means the population is increasing. The birth rate is higher than the death rate. Very good. The population growth. So basically, why population is growing? Because think about it in this way. Many infants that used to die are not going to die anymore. It's not that people are living longer, therefore the population is increasing. No. The children who were dying are not dying anymore, especially at these stages. So the population is growing because of the youth. We're saving the youth at the very, very young age. Now, at the third stage, birth rates start to go down. Why? Raise of hands. Discuss this with the person sitting next to you. Why the birth rates go down after the death rates go down. 1 minute. Okay, any answers? Raise of hands. Any answers? Answers, yes?
Because infant mortality went down, so they don't need to have as many kids.
They don't need, exactly, because infant mortality is going down. So they're realizing that their kids are surviving, right? So at this stage, they're realizing that their kids are surviving. So they think that actually we don't need to produce and reproduce, right? We need to stop reproducing, right? The kids are surviving. But why this happens with a delay? I would be impressed if someone answered this. Why it happens with a delay? The death rates fall, but after a while in stage 3, the birth rates decline, but with a delay. Why the delay? I give you 1 minute to discuss this. I think you can guess the answer. I would be very impressed. 1 minute. Imagine yourself as a household in a poor village. Think like a household in a poor village. Then you can find the answer. Sorry. Any answer? Answer? Raise of hands. Jonathan?
Well, imagine you're in this family and you're one of, for example, I'm the brother, and all of a sudden all your brothers and sisters survive and you're living in a household with 20 brothers and sisters. Then you begin to have children yourself, and you want to have less children?
No, it doesn't happen with the next generation. It happens at the time of parents' life. So the behavior doesn't change with the next generation. It changes in the lifetime of parents. Yes?
Possibly because of uncertainty, so they don't know whether their kids are going to die or not, so they wait a while and then keep...
Exactly, but I have to add half of the answer. Think about the household. This is happening. Okay. This is happening at the country level, at the village level. Okay? So the households naturally realize with a delay that at the aggregate level things are changing. They don't realize it immediately that, our kids have a higher chance of survival. It takes a bit of time for them to realize at the aggregate level things are changing. So the adjustments should take place at the household level. Remember, they don't take place at the aggregate level. You are a scientist watching it at the aggregate level. The households don't have this picture. The households see their own number of kids, and it takes a while for them to realize that things are changing. The survival rate is changing. That's why they adjust their behavior with a delay. So the birth rates go down, the households adjust. So basically, one important thing happens in this process. At the beginning, the number of kids per children is 7. Many of them die. The infant mortality rate goes down. Then the households start to adjust. They start to have less and less kids. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. 2 is the replacement level. Basically, the parents copy themselves. Replacement level. Most of you are coming from countries that have 2 kids or even less. Right? This is the replacement fertility level. Okay? And interestingly, imagine that. What's happened to the life expectancy in the society during this process? So what? Anyone?
Increases.
Increases. Why? Very good.
Better access to healthcare. You get to, survive if anything happens.
The death rates is going down. So the life expectancy is going up. So imagine that societies, at the beginning, large families, not very large societies. Why? Because the kids died, many of them. Here, nuclear family, only 2 kids, but the kids have a very high life expectancy. The demographic transition is, in a way, a big part of development. Forget about raising income and all that. Think about the story. You have a society that starts from a high birth rate and death rate and finishes at low death rate and birth rate. We have less kids, but with higher life expectancy. Yes? But in the middle, the population grows. Why? Because it takes time for us to adjust. For many years, the birth rate is higher than the death rate. Now, interesting things happen in this process. This is universal. Every country that have gone through this process experienced this. And most of you are coming from those countries, interestingly. So at the moment, you can think and you can trace your family story in this graph. Your grandparents, grandparents of grandparents. Let me explain to you why. So, whatever each country goes through this process, at the end, you have the emergence of nuclear families. 2 kids, 2 parents. High life expectancy. Second one, changing role of women. This is the most important factor. More important than education, more important than the income. Imagine a woman who has to take care of 6 kids. She has to spend most of her lifetime reproducing and childbearing. Compare it to a woman who has only 2 kids. She'll have more time for education. She'll have more time to enter into labor force. So the most important factor is that the role of women changes. You cannot think of any society that has gone through this process that fertility rate has gone down from 7 to 2 and the role of women hasn't changed. You cannot think of a single society on the planet. Whenever the infant mortality has gone down, the birth rate has gone down, you have a discussion about the role of women. The second one is the decline of marriage as an institution. These usually go together, empower of women and the decline of family. So the age of marriage goes up. Most of you are not going to get married, in your 20s. On average, that's not going to happen. The divorce rate is going to go up. So most of us, will have a low chance of going through a successful marriage. And urbanization. Whenever country experiences demographic transition, urbanization happens. You don't have a country in history that have experienced demographic transition but have not experienced urbanization. And urbanization happens for 2 reasons. Think of, early 19th century in London, East London, a very dirty place, okay? Infant mortality rate for the kids in London was very high. But when the wages start to gradually increase, infant mortality in urban areas go down. We call this urban increase. So naturally, the population of urban areas increase. Why? Because the mortality rate is going down. And usually cities, used to be very bad places in terms of disease. Disease were communicated very easily, so it was very natural that the death rates were high in the cities. However, with the Industrial Revolution, the income went up, better nutrition at the level of household, better hygienes, the urban population started to increase. And the other factor is rural migration. A lot of kids that are also surviving in rural areas, when they grow up, they want to go to town. Migration. Again, I'm pretty sure that you can follow this story in your own family. Some grandparents somewhere who had migrated from a rural area to an urban area in search of a better life. You just need to go back. Some people need to go back one generation like me. Some people need to go back several generations. But it is there. It is definitely there. And finally, you've been born here. From a family, in a nuclear family. Your parents and you and a sibling probably. Or even you and your own. Any questions? Now, interestingly, most of the regions in the world, irrespective of their income, education, are here. Fertility rate of 2. So we're at the moment, as we speak, most regions in the world have gone through their demographic transition. So a woman in Bangladesh is having 2 kids, is not having 10 kids, okay? The image is wrong. The woman in Bangladesh is having 2 kids right now. In India, 2 kids. In China, even 1 kid, okay? It is only sub-Saharan Africa that is lagging behind. Let's go to the table. Look at the total fertility rate. Children per woman. Spend some time in those comparisons. Middle East, each woman on average has about 3 kids. Same with South and Central Asia. Interestingly, East Asia is below 2. Latin America, 2.3, very close to replacement level. Now look at Sub-Saharan Africa, 5 kids per woman. 5 kids per woman. It's a massive difference with the other regions. So if we want to caricature Sub-Saharan Africa in one terms, that is lagging behind of the demographic transition. The fertility rate is so high, they're completely lagging behind. Now, I had a question. Why death rate is so high in Europe? Yes? Could you speak a little bit louder? Yeah. Exactly. Aging population. Look at the life expectancy of Europe and you get the answer. Although the death rates are higher, the life expectancy is higher. But look at the Sub-Saharan Africa death rates. Why the death rate is high in Sub-Saharan Africa? Because of high infant mortality. The kids are dying in Sub-Saharan Africa. In Europe, the elderly are dying. In Europe, the life expectancy is so high, 75 years. In Sub-Saharan Africa, 50. 25-year difference. 25-year difference. Now, so basically, The whole gist of the story is that the higher fertility rate causes population growth. Yeah. Look at the fertility rate of sub-Saharan Africa and the population growth. So don't get confused. It's not population growth is not that because people are living longer. Okay? Whatever region that have the highest population growth rate is that because you're having a lot of kids, the fertility rate is high. Yes? So the main driver of population growth is the fertility in here. You can see this is the regional trends in total fertility rate, births per woman, children per woman. Look at the phenomenal transition of Latin American countries and Asian countries. You know, they reduced same place, you know, they started from the same place after World War II. Right? In a span of half of decades, they reduced it, you know, for 6 kids per woman to nowadays 2 or even less than 2. Now, where I come from, Iran, they did this in a span of decade, just 1 decade, reducing the fertility rate of women from 7 to 2. Imagine the cultural impact. You know, when the parents talk to their grandparents, you know, a woman who's have 2 kids, you know, my mom talks with her mother, you know, who has 7 kids. Amazing story, isn't it? So basically, we can clearly see this, that demographic transition in Asia has been very rapid. So any Asian student just need to trace this in the family. Immediately realizes the drastic change in their own family. But in sub-Saharan Africa, the demographic transition, the fertility transition has been slow and late. Yes? Let me show this to you in the Gapminder. Yeah. Children per woman. Children per woman. Yeah. 6, you see, and then life expectancy. Look at the world of 1960. A clear divide. You got North Europe and Europeans and American countries here. These countries have small families, low children per woman, yes, and high life expectancy. A family, almost a nuclear family. The rest of the regions, you know, Asia, sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, yeah, Middle East, all of them, their fertility rate is very high. They're having on average more than 4 kids, okay, and the life expectancy is about the average of 50 years. This is the world of 1960. Shall we go forward? Ready? 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 Look at the other regions. Look at Asia. You were born here. This is the world today. Amazing catch-up. Most of the regions have about fertility rate of 2 and high life expectancy. The only lagging region is sub-Saharan Africa. Let's pick a country. Tanzania. Fertility rate, 5. Life expectancy, 63. So there's a massive divergence here. Let me give you 2 particular country examples that I like to basically pick this point in Bangladesh and Nigeria. Their starting point in the 60s, almost similar. Fertility rate in Bangladesh is 6, Nigeria 6, life expectancy almost the same, about 45 years, right? Let's see what happens now. Now, fertility rate, 5 in Nigeria, in Bangladesh, 2. Life expectancy, 7 years, Nigeria, 60 years. Now, this is what I love about Gapminder. Today's fertility rate of Nigeria is the same as the fertility rate of Bangladesh in 1984. That means Nigeria is 3 decades behind of Bangladesh in terms of reducing its fertility rate. So today's Nigeria is the same as 1984 Bangladesh. So 2 countries that really kind of clearly show you the divergence. Any questions? Now, why? Why Sub-Saharan Africa is lagging behind? We need to ask, what are the factors that determine the number of kids per woman? Any idea about those factors? Raise of hands, please. Do you want to discuss it in a minute? I'll give you a minute. You can discuss it. Think of different factors. Okay, raise of hands. Raise of hands. What are the factors? Yes?
Access to medical care,
Access to medical care. Why that is important?
because that would decrease the infant mortality rate.
Infant mortality. Yes. What else? Access to contraception. Very good. What else?
Role of women, so like when it's the workforce, they won't be reproducing as much.
Very good. Entrance of women in the workforce. Exactly. What else?
Education.
Education. Very good. So entrance of women in the workforce, education, contraceptions, access to medical care,
Social safety net.
social safety nets. Why that's matter?
Because, like, for example, pensions is the one that I was considering the most, like state pensions, because you were saying earlier how kids represent like the private insurance. So if you have social safety nets, you don't need kids for that purpose.
Yeah. I would this relates to one of the very important factors that comes to our mind, income. Yeah? Now let's list these. Infant mortality rate is the main causal factor throughout history. It's the main causal factor. So whenever infant mortality goes down, fertility rate goes down. This has been the case throughout history. You cannot find any country that's an exception to this rule. So it doesn't matter if the education of women doesn't change, if their income doesn't change, if the contraception doesn't change, if and only if the infant mortality rate goes down, that you manage to improve the survival of the kids, the woman will adjust their behavior. So think about the stupidity of, when Hillary Clinton says that we're going to promote women's rights in Afghanistan, a country with a fertility rate of 6, right? When the women are having 6 kids when you're having 6 kids in the lifetime, you cannot speak about civil society, you cannot speak about education. First, you need to bring the infant mortality rate down, therefore their fertility rate down. Then you can speak about the rest, okay? And this is very important. This is necessary and sufficient. You never seen the case that in a society that women have reduced their number of kids without infant mortality going down. Yeah, it's a necessary factor and is a sufficient. What I mean by sufficient, that means that whenever infant mortality rate goes down, women will automatically have less kids with a delay, irrespective of other factors, education, urbanization. The second one, female labor force participation. Could you remind me of your name? Rita. Rita. When women enter into labor force, it's basically a dynamic. The children survive. With a delay, you decide to have less kids. When you have less kids, you have time to do other things as a woman. You can enter into the labor force. When you can enter into the labor force, you decide to even have lower kids. Yeah? Female labor force participation. Remember why, take a look at the fertility rate in Middle East. Take a look at it in the table. What's the fertility rate in the Middle East? It's 3. I think highest after sub-Saharan Africa. Why? Because you have the lowest rate of female labor force participation in the Middle East. Women are not participating in the labor force. Education, as was mentioned, education changes values, especially for women. You know, it's no longer a value that you have a boy rather than a girl. It's no longer a value that your fertility is higher as a woman. You have a bigger size family. You can reproduce more babies. That's not a value anymore. Your values change with education. Access to contraception. Basically, it helps. The birth control. Other than that, is a bit difficult, right? Family planning, as we mentioned. These usually go together, right? It's a public policy. It's top-down. Family planning, it's a package. It gives you the contraception, the government, but also starts to educate you about reproductive behavior. Like, what is the process? Like, you know, how you get pregnant, what is the process, how you can avoid that. That's what we call a family planning policy. And finally, urbanization. Remember, as the infant mortality rate went down, you had the urbanization. And something interesting happens. In the urban areas, after a while, kids become a cost rather than a benefit, because you just cannot send them to the farm and work, right? In the cities, you have to invest a lot beforehand until they generate benefit for the household. So the cost of kids go up in urban areas. So how do families adjust? They say, we'll have less kids, but better quality. We spend more on each children, right? And this is very important. Remember, all of these are accelerating factors. The main causal factor is infant mortality rate. So what is the main determinant of fertility? Which factor? Higher? Exactly. The other factors are accelerating. They accelerate the process. They are additional factors. If they're there, the reduction of fertility happens faster. If not there, the reduction of fertility still happens, but at a lower pace. we got the answer here. Why sub-Saharan Africa are having a very high rate of fertility? Because they have the highest rate of infant mortality. An exception, really, in terms of regions. So when it comes to demographic, you see a clear divide, a clear African story, really. Of course, there's a big divergence between different countries, right? But as a region, we can say something about Africa, about sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, you have conflict-ridden areas, right? In the conflicts, usually fertility rate goes up because the mortality rate goes up. Yes. Other than that, we see a very high infant mortality rate in this region. Now, the question is, if you look at it, the death rates are very high. This high death rates in sub-Saharan Africa is, as we mentioned, is because of high infant mortality rate. And therefore, life expectancy is very low. Any questions? This is the evolution of under 5 infant mortality. Again, all these numbers are 83 per 1,000. 83 being killed out of 10,000. And you can see the transition. It is declining, but at a slower pace than the other regions. It is slow and late. So just like the transition of fertility, the decline of infant mortality in sub-Saharan Africa is slow and late. Want to change the role of women? Reduce the infant mortality. We have the trends in life expectancy. Interestingly, what do we see in this graph? I give you 2 minutes and then we'll have a break. What does this graph show us? Discuss this for 1 minute. Any answers? Yes. Yes? Sorry, could you, yeah.
There is a positive correlation between the fertility rates and
Yeah, positive correlation. The higher the death rate, the higher fertility rate. But this goes beyond the correlation. This shows you something interesting. There is no exceptions, really. Almost no exceptions. You don't see a country here that has a high fertility rate, okay, but a low mortality rate. Also, you don't see a country here that has a high mortality rate, but a low fertility rate. This graph, this clear line shows you that always these things go together. The death rate and the birth rate. Yeah? Let's have a 5-minute break.
where China jumped, so its fertility rate jumped, but then it wasn't on
Are you think the fertility jump, so the mortality?
fertility. It was the bottom axis. It was on the ones you got up on the internet. They weren't in the slide, and it. But then so here it just shows it decreasing the whole way through.
Meaning?
But then yes, but then it was just a part of it where there was a jump on the graph.
Yeah, because they're encouraging it after to be, nowadays actually they're encouraging it
Is that after
because
one child?
yeah.
Okay.
And we will, if we have time, we will talk about one-child policy in the tutorials, if time allows.
Come up here to see what it's showing.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, exactly. It's like moving around. You know, it's just- Now, I want you to think about this question. Why infant mortality is so high in Africa? The possible reasons for that. You can discuss this with the person next to you. Possible factors that can explain why infant mortality is so high in sub-Saharan Africa. I want the most important factor. I don't want a list of factors. So the question, I want you to answer what is the most important factor that is giving rise to a very high infant mortality rate in Africa. Okay, any possible answers? Any possible answers why infant mortality rate is so high in sub-Saharan Africa? Just 2 per people? Yes? Lack of medical services, very good. Yusuf, yes? Yeah?
It's kind of the same, but spread of disease, easy spread of disease.
Easy spread of disease. Okay, this continent is tropical, has a higher rate of disease than the others. Very good. Yes?
War, civil war.
It's conflict. Okay, what else? Tim? Famines. Okay. Yes?
Lack of access to clean water.
Lack of access to clean water. Yes? Poor nutrition. Now, why poor nutrition? Why all these factors? You list a lot of factors, poor nutrition, lack of access to health care, lack of access. Why? Yes?
I was going to give another factor.
Yeah?
Okay. Political instability.
Political instability, okay. Yes? So why doesn't provide these things? Low income, exactly. So let's start with this hypothesis. The possible explanation is that this region is poorer than the others. Low income per capita, lack of economic growth. Now let's see that if this is true. Now let me do a recap. Let's do a recap together so far. So, what was the region with the highest rate of population growth? Sub-Saharan Africa. So, Sub-Saharan Africa, the highest rate of population growth. Why the highest rate of population growth? High fertility rate. Why fertility rate was high? High infant mortality rate. Yes, so far in the lecture. Now we want to explain this. Why infant mortality rate is high. We want to go a step further. Okay. One of the explanations we had so far is the economic growth. It's because of the lack of economic growth that infant mortality is high, therefore the fertility rate is high, therefore the population growth is high. Okay. Now let's see if this is the case or not. Let's look at the data. Income per person, child mortality. Okay, let's go back to 1960s. What do we see here? We see that there are a bunch of rich countries, okay, that have a low infant mortality. The rest of the countries have a low income and a high income, have a low income and a high infant mortality rate. So when we look at this picture, we say, okay, income is a big factor, really. Maybe it's a big factor. But see what's happening through the years. What does this tell us, this trend?
Low income and low infant mortality. Low income and low infant mortality.
Low income and low infant mortality rate. In which countries?
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa is a laggard in here. Look at the other regions. Let me give you an example. You got most of these countries here. Think about these countries. Between the income per capita of 10,000 to the income per capita of 80,000, okay? And all of these countries have a low infant mortality rate. All of these countries have a low infant mortality rate. So you have a wide range of countries, whether they're very rich like the US, or like, a country, let's pick Mongolia here. 22, the death rate, income per capita 11,000. USA, let's pick another country. Oman, 12. Same level of infant mortality, but with a higher level of income. So what does this graph shows us is that a lot of countries, with wide range of income differences have managed to lower the infant mortality rate. So in a way, it shows you that you don't necessarily have to become rich to reduce your infant mortality rate. You don't necessarily have to become like the United States in terms of income level to reduce your death rates to the level of the USA. So in time, income is becoming less and less important for reduction of infant mortality rate. Let's look at it again. 60. Here, you couldn't lower, at this time, in the world of 1960s, you couldn't lower your infant mortality without having, you couldn't, rephrase it, you couldn't have a low infant mortality rate, without having a high income. Only high income countries had a low infant mortality rate. But look at the trend. As the trend goes, a lot of countries have managed to caught up without becoming ridiculously rich. It's the same with fertility rate. A lot of countries are now having 2 kids without becoming ridiculously rich. The person in the United States and the Bangladesh have the same fertility rate, the woman, 2. It's the same with the death rates. Okay, let me give you another clear example that I think this is a general trend. Now let's focus on a particular two case stories. And then again, Nigeria and Bangladesh. Yes? In the world of 1960, look at Nigeria. The income per capita, 3,000. Yes? 3,500. Bangladesh, 1,000. So Nigeria was richer than Bangladesh, right, in the 1960s. Now let's look at this trend. It's very interesting. Today, the income of Nigeria, 5,000. Infant mortality rate, 129. Bangladesh, the income per capita, 10,000, but the infant mortality rate is 38. So the income per capita of Bangladesh is, the average person is way smaller, almost half of the average household in Nigeria. However, the infant mortality rate in Nigeria is way higher than Bangladesh. So this is a perfect case that you don't need to become ridiculously rich to lower your infant mortality rate. And this has another side to it, that if you become rich, you don't necessarily reduce your infant mortality rate. This is a very important point. If you become rich, the infant mortality rate doesn't go down automatically. Why? Think about it. Because bringing down infant mortality rate needs a lot of public policy. It doesn't necessarily happen at the level of household. So yes, you can become rich, but you can deliver a very bad health policy. But you can be poor, but have a very good health policy. You can provide a very good access to hygiene in poor areas. It doesn't require a lot of money to do that. This was the beauty of World War II. A lot of inventions in health, medicines. So basically the economic cost of lowering infant mortality was reduced. You don't need to become ridiculously rich to reduce infant mortality. You could, with good public policy, with good health policy, you could be very effective with little money. So this is the gist of the story. That it's not about income per capita, it's about provision of health. It's the public policy issue. It's a health policy issue. And the other factor, as Youssef mentioned, is the disease burden. So this region has a higher disease burden and also worse public health policy. So you could change things in this region without actually increasing economic growth necessarily. With changing the public health policy, you could be very effective. So we shouldn't argue that we just need to wait, for this region to become rich, then the mortality rate goes down, therefore the fertility rate goes down and the population growth goes down. No. We could make big differences with changing the public health, providing better access to vaccinations, better sanitations, and better education, family planning. Okay, the third and the final part of our lecture. So far, we discussed the trends in the population growth. We saw that sub-Saharan Africa is an outlier. We explained why this is the case, what determines the fertility rate, what determines the population growth. Now we go to the final point, the thing they care about. What is the effect of population growth on economic growth? Yep, good? Let's go. Now, bear in mind, we care about the effect of population growth in income per capita growth, okay? Think about this class. The higher number of people we have here, our total number, the total income can increase, okay? Think about China. They have about 1 billion people. The total income is very high. But we don't care about total income. We're not dictators, okay? We care about the income per person, the individual's living standards. So we always have to see whether that if this class gets bigger, does the standard of each individual gets better or not? So that you'll be better off in a larger class, or you're better off individually in a smaller class. This is the question. We don't care about the total income of the class, okay? Now, there are 3 different views about the effect of population growth on economic growth. First are the population pessimists. They think that the population growth is bad for the growth of income per person. Then you have the population optimists. They think that you as an individual are better off in a larger class. You have basically a positive externality when you're surrounded by more healthy individual and creative people. Your life is better off. And finally, we have the new demographic theory. Basically, they say the effect of population growth on economic growth is transitional. It depends. We'll get to it. The first one, population pessimists, you all know the great Thomas Malthus. The first professor of political economy, a reverend, a person who actually inspired Darwin, to come up with his natural selection theory. A very conservative person. He believed that the poor deserved to be, left alone. He used to work for East India Company at some stage. But he was a hell of a good economist. Now, what was his theory? He says the power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man. Okay? We all know his theory, hopefully. That's it. He said that population increases exponentially. This is exponentially. That means through time, the rate of growth becomes higher and higher. Yeah? But the production of food is linear. So at some stage, we have more people than we can feed. And we'll have a famine. Yeah? Very simple. Food production per capita, the total food production versus the total population. According to him, he assumed that the technology is going to be fixed and environmental resources are fixed. You know, we got one single Earth now. You know, given a fixed technology, if the population grows, right, we're not going to have enough food to feed people. Okay? So what is the solution in this world of Malthusian world? Reduce the population growth rate. Okay. Why? Because we cannot, there is a limit to our Earth, the amount of food we can produce. So we cannot solve this problem by coming up with better technology. A techno-optimist is against them. It says we cannot solve this problem by technology. It's only through reducing the population growth rate. So therefore, we need to come up with better family planning, reduce the death rates, improve the hygiene. Now this idea became very influential in the 60s and 70s, you know. You had a tremendous population increase in South Asia. Cold War had a lot of effect to it, right? You know, people in Washington were really scared that, you know, when you have a lot of population growth in South Asia, you're going to have a communist revolution. You know, these peasants are going to revolt. There's going to be famine. You cannot produce food for them, and they're going to revolt. Actually, this was one of the main impetus for investing in agricultural revolution, green revolution in South Asia. That was one of the main motives of Washington to spend on that, to make sure that you could feed enough of mouth so they don't revolt and they don't establish communist countries. Now, then again, the 90s said the sudden rise of oil in the 1973 kind of vindicated this view, right? That we're running out of resources. And it's still very influential. You know, this view, every on and off, its surfaces goes down. You know, are we running out of oil? Are we running out of food? You know? Now, this time is different. I know we solved the problem before, but this time is really different. You know, with the climate change is the best example of it, right? By the way, let me. I don't know. There's something very human-centric about climate change, right? We think we're so important, right, that we're causing everything in the world, right? It should be us, right? We're definitely causing the climate change. Maybe we're not, right? We're very insignificant, you know. But anyway, maybe in 50 years' time they will laugh at us, you know, as one of these dogmas that became popular. Nothing happened, actually. We never know. Anyway, population optimists. The best person is Esther Bosserup. She said population density stimulates innovation in the economy. You know, basically, scarcity is the mother of all inventions. Let's not worry. It's a very techno-optimist story. You know, look at our food production per capita. It has been increasing and increasing and increasing. You know, despite all these gloom and doom stories. You know, now we have a fracking technology, so we can basically extract more oil. The price of oil has gone down again. Okay. And the whole idea is that with technology, you can solve everything. Techno-optimism. And the other person, which is very interesting, he was kind of an ideal of, you know, all these Catholic NGOs, okay, that kind of promoted, you know, population growth in a way. Julian Simon, he says, he believed that larger population means larger stock of human knowledge and ingenuity. Thus, population growth is good in the long term. Now, think about this class. Let's say we produce a lot of kids, we put them here, we invest a lot at the beginning in their education and health. They grow up together. Now, once they grow up, they're a more creative society, positive externalities. If you hang out with other people who are educated, healthy, right, good ideas come out. This is why we are really interested to live in cities. Think about it. Why we take all these efforts to come and live close to each other. You know, pile and pile of people. You know, why? Because the cities are an innovative place. There's a positive externality out of this concentration of humans, out of this clustering. You know, you rarely see innovations happening in history without concentration of people. So this is the exact opposite. Basically, it says maybe in the short term it's painful, but in the long term we reap the benefits. And he made the very, very famous bet. He said in the 60s, he bet that in the 80s the price of all commodities will go down. And he was vindicated as well. In the 80s, the price of all commodities became down. This idea became very popular. It faded again. Now, his book, called The Ultimate Resource, he predicted falling commodity prices. He wrote this book at a time the Reagan administration came to power, a conservative administration that had to listen to Christian lobbies in the US. Therefore, it couldn't really promote family planning, in the corners of the world. So they found the ideas of Julius Simon very in line with their administration. And as I mentioned, this was a story of long term. In the long term, we're better off if we live in societies and countries with more people, educated, healthy, with good ideas. Now let's look at the evidence. Who's right? The optimists or the pessimists? Well, the evidence is mixed. Neither of them are correct. This graph shows you the GDP per capita growth. Again, remember, we're not interested in total GDP. We're interested in GDP per capita growth and the population growth, right? It's close to not a positive, not necessarily a negative, it's inconclusive. Neither of the schools are right. And that's why we think that both of the schools offer a very simplistic view. The world, as usual, is more complicated than what they think. That's why we have the third explanation, new demography theory. What does this explanation tell us? It says the effect of population growth on the income per capita growth is transitional. Right? What do we mean by transitional? It says it's dynamic. At the beginning, it is not good, but then it becomes good. It means that it depends on where you're standing on the demographic transition. That is the explanation. The explanation says that depending where you are in the demographic transition, population can have a positive or negative impact on income per capita growth. And it says that the growth really depends on age structure of the society. It's not the size of the population, it's the age structure of the population. Is the population very young, very old, or it has a lot of people in the working age population? So it says that it's not about the population size, it's about the age structure of the population. And the age structure of the population is really determined on where you're standing, where you are at the transition. At the beginning of the transition, the age structure is very young. A lot of people in the young ages. Why? Sorry? High infant mortality rate. No? Yes? Sorry? Lower life expectancy. Why then a younger age population?
Is it because there's a lag between the decline in birth rate?
No.
The birth rates are high, right?
No.
Up to lower life expectancy. So people have kids earlier on because they're not going to live up to.
Sorry?
They're not going to live for long, so they're
No. Remember, go back to who were the first survivors of death rates going down. What happened in the first stage? The death rates go down. Yeah? Who are the main survivors? Who are the main beneficiaries of death rates going down? Who? Infants. So, naturally, the age structure of the population becomes very young. In here, a lot of infants would die. Now they're surviving. Yeah? So the age structure is very young. You're dealing with a lot of families that have kids and their kids have survived. A very high youth dependency at this stage. This is the same in the age structure. A large percentage of the population is made by infants. And this is not, of course, good for growth. The women cannot enter into the workforce at the early stages. The family cannot save a lot. You know, children are very costly goods. They need to spend on their children. And this doesn't give an immediate positive impact on income, right? So here they are investing in their children. It's all costs, no contribution to income. They're saving less in the bank account. Therefore, lower investment in the economy. This is not very good for growth. However, things start to change here. The birth rates go down, okay? So the families stop reproducing. They focus on their given number of kids. The kid starts to grow up. These will go from here to here. They start to enter into the working age population. Yes? So basically, in these stages, when the death rate is down and the birth rate is declining, you know, you have a low dependency ratio. Not a lot of old people who cannot work, not a lot of infants, a lot of people in the working age. This is a very good potential for growth. You know, the families, the parents have invested in the education and health of their children. Now you've got an educated and healthy workforce. And the woman can enter into the workforce, and the family can save at the end of the story. They don't need to spend a lot on their kids anymore. They can start to save. Therefore, the investment in the economy can grow up. What do we call this stage? Demographic gift or demographic dividend. Window of opportunity. You've got a lot of young, educated kids and a lot of people in the working age. And there are not a lot of elderly or infants to be taken care of per family. So the dependency ratio is low here. Now what happens at the end? Of course, they will grow up. They move from here to here. Look at here, interestingly, it's shrinking. We got a high old age dependency. Population aging, the exact situation of the UK right now. The number of people at the working age is reducing. So I'm here to work as an immigrant. I need to pay taxes to be spent on the public health care and the pension of the elderly. Yes? An aging population. So the whole point is that when the age structure changes, it has different implications for growth. At the beginning, a very young age structure, not good for growth. At the end, a very old age structure. In the middle, you have the opportunity for growth. Let's look at the evidence. This perfectly fits with the East Asian miracle story. When these countries were growing, their total dependency ratios were declining. This is a total dependency ratio. So it gives you the percentage of people living below age below 14 and age above 65 as a percentage of total population. All right. So dependency in China, South Korea have been declining, Japan as well, during the miracle years of the post-World War. Interestingly, now China is entering the final stage, aging population. With many rich countries, they're already there. And interestingly, you see this story corresponds with the increasing saving rates. As the youth dependency and the old dependency decreases, families start to save a lot, and this is good for growth. You have investment. When you get old, of course, you start to spend your savings. Yeah. Exact stage with the baby boomers in rich countries now. Future of aging population in East Asia. Look at China. The youth dependency is already going down. Look at the old age dependency. It's going to go up. Dependency ratio is going to go up. This is going to happen in your lifetime. So again, another extra factor that when you're analyzing the long-term future of China is the age structure. Okay, the age structure. Is the growth is going to go slow down in the China? You know, maybe one of the factors is population aging, and it's going to have a negative effect on growth. Japan's age structure and dependency ratio following the same pattern. I think it has the worst in the world. I think the oldest age structure in the world. Dependency ratios are very high. The life expectancy is really, I think, almost 90 years. It's kind of interesting. Japan is one of the few societies that, although they went through all these demographic transitions, still they retain some conservative elements, especially regarding the role of women. The role of women has changed a lot, but comparing to the other regions, they're an outlier. They're an outlier. The role of women still has its traditional, of elements as well. Now, future for sub-Saharan Africa, a reason to be optimistic, right? In the 30 years, 20 years time, this region is going to enter into the next stage of demographic transition. The fertility rate, if the fertility rate goes down quicker, they have an opportunity. The youth dependency goes down, and if they now spend on education and health, which they're doing, then in 20 years' time, you've got healthy, educated people in the working age. This that gives you the total dependency ratios in different regions of sub-Saharan Africa. In most of the regions, it's going to decline. However, we should be careful. The gift phase just gives you an opportunity. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to grow. The fact that you're going to have a lot of healthy, educated people in their working age doesn't mean that you're going to have an economic miracle. Look at the Arab Spring. The main factor that was the same in all these countries was that they were in the middle of their demographic transitions. All of these countries. A lot of young people, educated, who don't have work. This is a recipe for disaster. A recipe for disaster. So if you ask me what was the main driver of Arab Spring, I would say demographic transition. A demographic dividend which was not harnessed. You didn't create growth for these people. These people give you an opportunity for growth, but you couldn't create job for them. If you create job for them, you have a miracle story. If you fail, I think you have a disaster story. So, remember, we have to harness this demographic dividend. Interestingly, whenever you had demographic transition, you had political change as well. Democratization in Europe, happened during the demographic transition. French Revolution happened at the height of demographic transition and urbanization. All these things go together. So remember, if you want to harness this dividend, a lot of this demographic transition gives you the opportunity but doesn't guarantee economic growth. You need to invest in human capital and infrastructure, and more importantly, you're going to create jobs. This is the stuff we're going to talk about in the rest of the term. Now, before finishing extras, this is a brilliant documentary. If you want to watch just one documentary about the content of this course, watch this. It's from Hans Rosling. It's called Don't Panic. It's about the population growth. A brilliant documentary. A brilliant documentary. I would rate it among top 3 documentaries I've ever seen in my life. Now, let's summarize and finish. First point, high fertility rate is the main engine of high population growth rate. Remember, it's not about not dying. It's about having more kids that leads to higher population growth, okay? Think of rich countries. Life expectancy is increasing, but the population is shrinking. Okay, so it's not about life expectancy. It's about fertility. That's what is the main determinant of population growth. Now, what is the main determinant of fertility rate is infant mortality. Which factor? Which factor?
Infant mortality.
What? And regarding the final point of our lecture, you had 3 schools of thought about the effect of population growth on economic growth. You had the pessimists. This view is very popular nowadays with the climate change. You have the optimists, still around, these techno-optimists in San Francisco who think you can solve every problem, in the world with technology, right? It goes back to 18th century, this view. Okay, this arrogant view of techno-optimism. And finally, you had new demographic school. Let's say, demographic transition gives you an opportunity. It depends on where you are in the transition period. At the beginning, it's high youth dependency, it's bad for growth. Once you pass that stage, you have an opportunity because the dependency ratio goes down, and then at the end, you have an aging population, the dependency rate goes up, is not good for growth. Finally, the evidence, the effect of population growth on income per person is transitional. It depends on where you are at the demographic transition. Thank you.